This is Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk TNT.
Is a slight increase in the level of CO2 in the atmosphere good or bad for life on Earth?
Well, it's definitely good for life on Earth. We know that very well from the geological record. The current geological period has extremely low CO2 levels. Only once in the past has it been this low. And over most of the history of the Earth, CO2 levels have been much higher. Plants are adapted to much higher levels than CO2. You can see the whole Earth greening now, largely due to CO2. It's been a major contributor to the increase in crop yields. There have been other factors too, fertilizer, better varieties, but CO2 has been quite substantial. So there's nothing bad about it.
But there's a lot of people who do think there's something bad about it, of course. So I take it you do not buy into man-made climate change, no?
Well, of course, there's a little bit of man-made climate change. For example, every time you build a city, it gets a little bit warmer because you cut down all the trees and you get rid of the meadows and things that previously cooled that area. So if you look all around the world, cities are typically several degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. And the bigger they are, the warmer they get. So that's, man-made warming, but it doesn't have anything to do with CO2. It has to do with suppression of cooling from transpiration of water for the most part. There are other factors too. It affects, convective cooling, the wind and stuff like that, but it's mostly less water evaporating. So of course there are man-made effects on climate on local levels. Now CO2 itself is a greenhouse gas, and so it does cause some warming. And I personally think that the increase since pre-industrial times from maybe 280 parts per million to a little over 400 today has caused a small amount of warming. I think most of the warming we've seen, and there has been warming, that's clear from many pieces of evidence, I think most of that has been a natural recovery from the little ice age. It really got cold in 1500, 1600, 1700, and we're only now beginning to pull out of that.
I take it that's a good thing, but you must have received a fair amount of criticism for going against the status quo. How much criticism have you received?
Well, of course, I expected to get criticism because this is something that is a religion for many people, and you don't criticize a person's religion, no matter what denomination they are, whether they're Christian or Muslim or Hindu, that's kind of a sacred thing. And so, unfortunately, this is a religion disguised as science. And so if you criticize it, you have to expect blowback, in many cases quite vicious. I get occasional death threats from people whose religion has been sullied by my comments.
So would it be fair to call climate change a little bit of a religious idol and something that people are willing to get on board with without actually doing the research because it's a beliefs rather than it is based on fact?
Well, yeah, there are many reasons that people have signed up to the climate establishment message. There are many honest, good people who've been misled, since childhood. All they've heard is that, evil carbon dioxide is poisoning the planet. No one ever told them then when they were children that they're breathing out 4% carbon dioxide with every breath. It's anything but a poison. It's absolutely essential for life. So I feel a little bad about these people. The establishment has brainwashed them. Then there are others, my colleagues, for example, in science and academia. This has turned out to be a boatload of money. It's wonderful funding for your laboratory. It gives you all sorts of muscle in your university because you're bringing in all of these grants with all the overhead that goes with it, and making the university look good. After all, you're saving the planet. And so these people usually are sophisticated to know that at the very least this is grossly exaggerated, and but they're not willing to say that, because the benefits are so great. And then,
Indeed.
there are the politicians who've latched onto this as a good way to gain power, of all human sins, probably the worst of all is the lust for power. I prefer people who lust for money or lust for, sex or something like that. It's less damaging than the lust for power. And so CO2, climate change has been a tool for those people also. So
Yeah.
on the whole, it's been a pretty bad episode of human history, but we've had similar ones before. The last time there was something like this in my country was the Prohibition era, when we banned alcohol, and people said at the time, well, this may not work, it might encourage organized crime, it might be hard to enforce. Of course, they didn't get the half of it. It was much worse than anyone predicted, and we even passed a constitutional amendment. Nobody had the courage to stand up and say this is a mistake, but it was a terrible mistake. And we have a drug problem today, part of which traces back to Prohibition. That's when these crime families got their start. So every now and then, humanity does just completely crazy things, and we're doing it again with climate.
Again, the powers that be, especially the authorities, must have got a lot of money to tackle prohibition, and I believe that's part of the reason as well why they focused in on marijuana laws as well at the time. They banned marijuana around the same time because they knew they were going to get lots of money, because prohibition was a way to fund these sort of things.
Right. That's right. So human history is loaded with hypocrisy.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I've done a lot of research on the grassroots of the climate change agenda, and is the modern climate change agenda a scam manufactured by the likes of Maurice Strong and the Club of Rome in the late 60s and 70s? Is that what we're dealing with still? The remnants of this very clever way to enact power and to take power by introducing something that was hard to prove or disprove?
Yes, I think you've described it correctly. Many people who are the foot soldiers don't realize that, but I think this was manufactured with a fair amount of thought and cleverness. You have to hand it to them. Here's this crazy meme, this crazy narrative that this essential element of life that we breathe in and out, is a poison. How can you get away with that? I mean, it's amazing. But you can look back in history. For example, we in my country had the Salem witch trials in 1690. And it wasn't pushed by the common people. The common people weren't even sure there were witches to begin with. It was pushed by Harvard, graduates, theology graduates. They were the judges at the trial. And, one of them, Cotton Mather, was even selling a book on how to detect witches. It was selling very well at that time. And so and nobody had the courage to say there's no such thing as witches. A few people tried and they were simply hung. And so it was finally stopped because of judicial niceties that, the main evidence was spectral evidence that some charming little girl would dream, that her neighbor was consorting with Satan and testify in court. And, who's going to disbelieve the dream of a, innocent little girl, right? Like Greta.
This is Johnny Vedmore on today's News Talk TNT.